Welcome. My name is Jan McFarish. I'm the Education and Events Director of the Free Speech Union. This is our third Belfast Speakeasy. How many of you have been to our previous ones? Hands up. Very good. Okay. So yes, I think just over a year ago we were at the Titanic Hotel in Belfast here, and then in September we were at the Crumlin Road Jail, and we're going to all the prestigious venues thanks to our local consultant. I don't know where's next, but if you've got any suggestions, then let me know. So the topic of this evening's discussion is policing our streets versus policing our tweets. I think that's fairly obvious what it's going to be about. We're going to have a fairly wide-ranging conversation, actually, because I think, although that's the starting point, knowing the speakers, I think we'll probably cover up quite a lot of ground, and knowing what you guys are like, I'm pretty sure that lots of very, very interesting questions will come up during the course of the evening. We're going to run it slightly differently. So we're going to sort of divide up the evening into a number of different topic areas, starting with hate crimes, non-crime hate incidents, and we're going to pick our first guest's brains about that. We'll get the panel's views, and then we'll come straight out to you for your questions to the panellists on that particular topic. And then we'll move on to the next topic, which will be two-tier policing. So if you've got questions about two-tier policing, don't ask them after the first section, ask them after the second section. And then we'll probably talk a bit about America. Trump, Vance, them kind of beating us up for our free speech record, see whether that's justified or not, whether it's helpful. And then we'll talk a bit about the media, and whether people have lost trust entirely in legacy media, whether there's problems associated with that, what we can expect from media developments down the line. And then we'll find out a bit more about what our panellists have got planned for their future work. So we'll keep on coming back out to you, so you're not all sitting there waiting for the final 45 minutes to kind of have your say. So hopefully that will work, and if it doesn't work, we'll never repeat that particular format. It will be memory hold. Good. Let me introduce our speakers. So to my left here, we've got Harry Miller. I'm sure probably lots of you have seen Harry either in person speaking, or you've read about him in our Free Speech Union newsletter, or you've seen him on Talk TV or GB News. We've known Harry at the Free Speech Union since the very beginning. I think probably before the beginning of the Free Speech Union. You were already in touch with Toby Young in the very early days. So Harry is the co-founder of the pressure group Fair Cop. And if you follow him on Twitter, you'll know that they do an awful lot of varied activities and gaining attention and drawing attention to some really important questions of policing in particular. And Harry was the first person, I think, he can correct me if I'm wrong on that, to shine a light on the problem of non-crime hate incidents. These kind of strangely Orwellian records that go onto the police database, recording crimes that we haven't actually committed. So Harry, I'll come to Harry in a moment to talk us through what happened to him, so that you can understand a bit more about how he found out about them, what he understood them to be, and also the kind of legal challenges that you very, very successfully made that have really stood us in good stead when it comes to pushing back against them. And then to my right, we've got Jenny Holland. So Jenny is an Irish-American writer based here in Belfast. She spent several years working in mainstream media in the US, including 3 years working at the New York Times. So it'll be very interesting to get her perspective on mainstream media, what you think of the Substack world and the kind of alternative media space. And she's been living in Northern Ireland now for quite a long time. How long have you been here?
13 years this time.
13 years, okay. And her Substack is called Saving Culture from Itself. And she's written also for Spiked and The Critic, Feminist Current, and The Spectator USA. And then a lot of you probably will also recognise Tom Slater. Tom is the editor of Spiked online magazine, which hopefully a lot of you have already read. I know they've published me, they've published you. Have you written for Spiked?
I think so.
Yeah, okay. So Spiked is a great ally for the Free Speech Union because predates us by 20 years. And also has been the most consistent defender of free speech. And for me, it's always been a really, really, really helpful weather vane. Whenever there's a new free speech issue arising, I always go to Spiked first to try and find out what I think about that issue and to see what they've made of it. Tom also writes regularly for The Spectator. He's written for The Sun, The Telegraph and The Sunday Times. And you, as I said, you may well have seen him on TV and radio. He's also the co-host of Spike's podcast, a weekly podcast of the news roundup, and Last Orders, which is a very fun podcast, which is kind of kicking back against nanny statism, and I've been on that a few times as well. That's very good fun. And so Spiked, they've just celebrated their 25th anniversary, which I can't quite believe because I remember when it started. I don't think Tom was born, but I remember. It's older than my children, but I do remember it being a really big deal when Spike launched. Maybe we can talk a bit more about that and how it's developed over the years. And as I said, it's been the kind of most stalwart defender of free speech in the publishing space in the UK, and also branching across into America as well. So that's our panel. So to start off with, I just want to turn to Harry and ask him to tell us his story. How many of you think you know Harry's story? Quite a few, but I'll get him to freshen it up as he tells it. So tell us what happened to you.
Okay, so I was Harry the Owl on Twitter, an absolute nobody up until January 2019. I tweeted about Sheffield Wednesday, my favourite football club, and other bits and pieces. I think the only kind of activism I'd got involved with was with a character called Marine A. I don't know if you remember Marine A back in the 2017, 2018. I was nobody, and it was my wife actually who's sitting just down there 2 rows back. Just stand up. Come on, just stand up. Give everybody a wave. It was actually my wife who is responsible for me being here right now, quite honestly, because it was her that put me she sort of got me onto this idea that trans people were saying that they were literal women. And that offended my philosophical sense, because if you're a woman, you're not a man. It seems to be very straightforward. And also, being the husband of a wife and the father of daughters, I was quite concerned about what I saw as an encroachment by men in dresses on women's rights. And so it was my wife who encouraged me to start tweeting about it. She said, until men start getting in on the action, nobody will listen. And so I duly obeyed my wife. And the next thing I know, PC Gull from Humberside Police has turned up at my door, wanting to check my thinking. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that, because that's what he said. He said, "Are you Harry the Owl on Twitter?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "Right, well, we've had a complaint because somebody's decided that your workplace is not safe for trans people." Well, I don't know if you know my workplace, but my workplace was in Ingham Dock. My workplace is about the hairy-arsed place on earth. It makes Belfast look sophisticated. It really, really is that bad. People look up into the sky when an aeroplane goes past and go, "What's that?" It's dueling. It is proper dueling banjos country. So the very notion that we would have trans people in the workplace was quite frankly ludicrous.
Sounds the ideal place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm also an ex-policeman. So I said, "Look, have I committed a crime?" And he said, "No, you've not committed a crime, but I do need to check your thinking," which struck me as absolutely bizarre. And I mentioned this to the officer. I said, "I've not committed a crime. You're here to check my thinking. Have you any idea what that makes you?" And he said, "No." I said, 1984 is a dystopian novel. It's not a police how-to manual. And of course, that reference entirely passed him by. Anyway, in the process of this discussion, what he said was that I'd retweeted a limerick, which says, "Your breasts are made of silicon, your vagina goes nowhere, and we can tell the difference even when you're not there. Your hormones are synthetic, now let's just cross this bridge. What you have, you stupid man, is male privilege." It's not even a bloody limerick, is it? It's a piece of shitty feminist doggerel. It's that. But this is where it gets really, really interesting, because he said it wasn't a crime, but it was the precursor to a crime, and that without what he called necessary police intervention, I, Harry Miller, would go on to commit crime. I asked him, "What crime did you have in mind?" Now, are you all sitting down? Because the answer was genocide. And I wish I was joking, because apparently I was at stage 1 retweeting shitty limericks, and stage 5 is full-on death camp. And I was going to be the change agent in that, without PC Gull coming and checking my thinking and stopping me in my tracks. Now, the way they mark you out and tell whether you are on the inevitable train toward genocide is they mark you out with this thing called a non-crime hate incident. And that's where we discover them. Like, what the hell is a non-crime hate incident? Well, a non-crime hate incident is any incident perceived by any person, including the victim or anybody else, that is motivated by hate. You don't have to have done anything. You don't have to be hateful. In fact, the guidance says that no evidence of hate is necessary. Again, this struck me as absolutely ludicrous. There was no possible way of getting off this naughty list. You couldn't present evidence to get you off the naughty list. There was no right of appeal. You were simply on the naughty list. And then we discovered that this naughty list was designed to stop you getting employment. That through, if you applied for a job in certain fields, education, third sector, working with children or vulnerable people, the chief constable had it within his gift to reveal to your potential employer that you were on this hate list. We said that was entirely wrong, so we took Humberside Police, the chief constable of the force that came at me, and we took the College of Policing, who set these ridiculous hate crime guidance. We took them to the court, and thankfully in 2019 we won against the chief constable, and then in 2020 or 2021 we went to the Court of Appeal and we had the entire hate crime guidance struck down. So as far as I'm concerned, that was a bit of a victory.
No, it is extraordinary. But when, this is really early days,
yeah,
isn't it? For both the issue, the sex-gender issue, but also obviously for, well, you're the person who brought NCHIs to light. You'd not heard of them before?
Nobody had heard of them. They'd been around since 2014. I mean, shamefully, under a Conservative government, it was Theresa May, when she was Home Secretary, who brought them in. And the logic was this. The logic was, if you can catch a non-crime incident early enough, then it won't go on and develop into a full-blown crime. And the crime that they actually had in mind was the murder of Stephen Lawrence. But the academic research behind it was based on a book by a fellow called Gordon Allport. And for him, the end stage is genocide. So you go through discrimination, you go through hitting people, being nasty to people, murdering people, to full-on genocide. And so the logic was that if you catch this early enough, intervene, check somebody's thinking, re-engineer their brain, if you like, then they're not going to go on and commit a hate crime. That's basically it.
And I think what you've done, I mean, it's really worth looking up the judgment, actually, in the which one was it?
The High Court.
The High Court judgment by Mr. Justice Julian Holmes. Because sometimes you read the words of judges and you just can't make head nor tail of it. When you read that judgment, it's really, really clear, the rights and wrongs. And I'll read you the main quote that's brilliant. He says, "The effect of the police turning up at Harry's place of work because of his political opinion must not be underestimated. To do so would be to undervalue a cardinal democratic freedom. In this country, we have never had a Checker, a Gestapo or a Stasi. We have never lived in an Orwellian society. The police's actions, taken as a whole, had a chilling effect on Harry's right to freedom of expression." I mean, that should be enough, shouldn't it? That's a really, really simple restatement. So what's the weight of that judgment?
Well, the initial weight was quite telling. When that judgment came out, and the Chief Constable of Humberside had been likened to, his force was likened to the 3 worst possible police forces in the whole of history, his response was to issue a traffic update on the road between Hull and Hessel. It just didn't seem to take it serious. In fact, I got hold of the Chief Constable and said, look, you've just been compared to the Gestapo. Do you not really think that, having lost in court, you ought to at least issue a statement? they did issue a statement, and the Chief Constable then invited me to the police headquarters for coffee. We kissed and made up. But well, I'm like that. I'm nice like that. What was quite worrying, I said to the Chief Constable, I said, Lee, I kind of get it why a young copper might, he's been on a course, it's gone to his head, and he's gone a little bit too far. But why did somebody up the chain of command not apply some common sense? And the Chief Constable looked me in the eye and said, Harry, you've got to understand, common sense is not an appropriate tool for a police officer because it leads to unpredictable outcomes. And I found that more chilling than anything, because if we have a police force that is divorced from common sense, we end up in a place where police, start arresting parents because they've confiscated somebody's iPad. Could that ever happen? Well, it did today, didn't it? So, yeah, I think this notion that policing should be divorced from common sense and should be entirely dictated to by this nebulous College of Policing and its ridiculous step-by-step guidance is absolutely crazy. It's not what Sir Robert Peel had in mind, and it's not the kind of police force that you want or I want.
Okay, I'm going to come to Tom. And Tom, when you first heard Harry's story, I'm assuming you would noticed it fairly early on, given where your attention tends to go. So what was your view?
Well, it was a particularly stark example of what the police have become, which is risible, really, in so many respects. It's kind of Stasi as if it was run by non-binary HR managers, like it's both authoritarian and ridiculous at the same time, But the thing about Harry's story that struck me the most, I think, is the figure of PC Gull himself. Because I think often when we talk about the rise of the speech police, there's often a tendency, and I understand it on some level, to say, well, this is a matter for the law. If it's not too loaded a phrase, they're just following orders. They're just enforcing the laws which have been set by censorious politicians. And yet what was so clear in that moment, and what I think subsequent evidence definitely backs up, in terms of the police really transforming into a force which is incredibly preoccupied with policing thought and speech, this is something that's been happening within the organisations and the institutions themselves. This is something which is really summed up by the whole non-crime hate incidents phenomenon anyway, because it was never created by a piece of legislation. There was never a law that was passed saying this should happen. There was the Macpherson report in 1999. It made amongst its recommendations that there should be more collection of racist incidents, and also suggested that they should be essentially subjective, that you should just report them and then they should be put down as a matter of gathering intelligence. And then it kind of just slowly gestates through various policing quangos, and then you end up with that 2014 guidance, which is what ended up with Harry's name on that blacklist. So there you get a really kind of clear example of, I think, of how this isn't just about laws being passed. There's also a culture within policing which is developed, which has, like a sponge, just sucked up all of the kind of censorious, identitarian ideas that are in the establishment more broadly. I think people were particularly surprised by it, but they think of the police as generally a kind of small c conservative sort of institution. But I think that's changing in a lot of ways. There's probably some superficial reasons for that. Harry will know more about this than me, but particularly police higher-ups, it seems to be quite a kind of university graduate type of thing. You even see sometimes particular positions where they almost require or encourage university graduates. I think on the basis of recent evidence, they'd be better off banning university graduates from taking on those kinds of roles. So there's that. But I think there's also a kind of deeper problem, which is that because they have this post-Macpherson, post the Metropolitan Police being labelled institutionally racist and so on, they've decided that they need to atone for these past wrongs. But the way in which they want to do it is by telling people to shut up for things they said on the internet, rather than just actually policing without fear or favour, rather than just actually trying to gain the trust of everyone in society. They really think that the way they're going to get people on side who might historically have been more mistrustful of the police is shushing people on social media and turning up at their house when they criticise their child's school too vigorously. It's obviously risible on the face of it, but I think reflects a kind of a general shift that's happened in so many of our institutions because these sorts of ideas are in the ascendancy at the moment.
So what it does seem, though, is that the core sense of purpose is transformed almost organically by the shift towards a subjective approach to crime itself. So crime is in the eye of the reporter or the complainant, but also the sense of what it means to create a better society. So rather than a more orderly society or one that's safe for people, it becomes more of a social justice model. And I remember meeting very young officers who were kind of in training a few years ago, probably 10 years ago, and they really did see themselves as social workers. The one I spoke to had training he thought he'd had training in neuroscience and child development, and he thought that he was going to be spotting that when he went to homes, and his kind of safeguarding role was really at the forefront, but it wasn't in a really practical way. It was more like, is this adequate parenting going on? And not in the sense of, is this child visibly neglected, but more, is there enough love in the house? And it was really extraordinary. I thought, gosh, how on earth has that role transformed? I mean, it's not like we don't have criminals who are also causing us physical harm or taking our property. So what do you think explains that?
Well, I think it's fundamentally about a kind of sense of looking for a new purpose, as you say. Also, this desire to atone for things that have taken place in the past. And that, so much of the kind of speech policing which is going on, which is often over and above what the law requires as well. I mean, there was those recent statistics in the Times, they did an investigation of the number of people who were being arrested each day, essentially, for communications offences, grossly offensive speech under the Communications Act and the Malicious Communications Act. And they found that 30 people a day were being arrested, which, as Greg Lukianoff, the president of the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression in the US, he calculated that we're comfortably arresting more people for speech in the UK today than America did during the first Red Scare in the 1920s. So that tells you something about how bad things have gotten. But another thing in that particular study, which was really interesting, was that even though we've seen like a more than 50% rise in these arrests since the pandemic, convictions are actually going down. So this is clearly the police zealously pursuing people over and above what the law actually requires. And I think it does speak to not just the kind of sense of atonement, but that kind of idea that the police are almost social workers, as you suggest. But it does make me laugh because the fact that the starting point for so much of this is a sense that we need to right historical wrongs, that the police, the kind of horrors of policing past need to be addressed in the present. If you think the number one thing that the police could do for, say, a working class black family in an inner city, going to Harry Miller's house is not one of those things. So in the context of all of this speech policing while tackling actual violent crime seems to be an increasingly rare occurrence for a lot of constabularies these days. It just underlines what an absurd venture it is. It kind of fails on its own terms as much as anything else, I suppose.
Jenny, do you think these sort of stories resonate over here? I mean, are there very, very different problems of policing here?
The general question of problems of policing is a little bit beyond my remit, but I want to, Tom said something there about the small c conservative police, which was always my impression and understanding from when I was growing up until about literally a week ago. When it really fully dawned on me that actually the Overton window has moved so far that sort of woke light or woke adjacent assumptions are now the common sense of society, even among centrist dads and bobbies and all of the institutions. I can't think of a single one. Yours. I can't think of a single legacy institution that hasn't succumbed top to bottom, rank and file, to woke or woke adjacent beliefs and actions. And as regards here, obviously, despite my accent, I'm from here. Half my family is here. I've lived here many years. I was educated here. I know the place very well. And the legacy problems of policing and the troubles and speech, we had political speech issues here years ago. We had civil rights issues here years ago. We had a whole peace process. We have this whole power sharing government, and but actually, so there's a lot of good has come of that. Let's say good has come of that. People aren't killing each other anymore. That's the most important part. But what we have now is this sort of smothering, intensely consensus-based, bureaucratic, quango controlled government apparatus where democracy is essentially non-existent. I mean democracy as in actual voter-led change. It's dead. It's that parrot in the Monty Python sketch. It is gone. It has ceased to exist. And, and Harry, it's funny because I remember that. I don't remember exactly when I first heard that story, but it was around the time that it happened. I'd been following these issues from a long time ago. And the thing about him saying you were on your stage 1 of stage 5 is genocide, it's hilarious. But actually, things like that now are, I think, now we live that idea that we should be taking seriously these words, these hurty words, taking them so seriously that we're equating them with a single person committing genocide, which is complicated to envision. But now the entire society, I mean, not the entire society, but a large portion of society is entirely on board and enthusiastically participating in snitch culture. Okay? So now we have people dropping dimes on each other and on their neighbors and on parents in their schools because of hurty words. So I would like to know, I mean, obviously legislation and institutions, because of the power they hold, are, extremely important. But I don't work at that level, and I don't live at that level. I live on a level where someone very close to me, I won't name any names, who is also a minor, was reported to the PSNI for getting into an argument with another minor online. And that was followed through on. And I think, and here I was just reading the sort of recommendations from these awful quangos like the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission, and they talk of signal incidents, which are the non-crime hate incidents, what they're calling them here. And I'm now thinking that this particular case of this child having the police called on him is probably registered with one of those signal events, even though it actually wasn't about a protected characteristic. But the point is, a grown-ass woman thought, oh, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to call the cops on a 14-year-old. I mean, this is the culture we have at the moment, and the only thing I can think to do in response is to just become even more mouthy.
Yeah. So that does raise the question of how people learn to change their expectations of those in authority and how that's been cultivated, because it doesn't come from nowhere, does it? And I remember 15 years ago working in academia and having quite a lot to do with public sector employees in social services and various other things. And the big thinking was early intervention, risk prevention, and this kind of sense all the time that you were looking for signs upstream that would then become much bigger problems downstream. And it's exactly the same as the kind of genocide pyramid or whatever. They were using all these models, and it was really bizarre, because you'd have these kind of sociological theories being picked up on by somebody who just worked delivering some kind of essential local service. So there was this strange, it was like an ideology, and I can sort of see how that transforms the role of these kinds of, really essential services, and then people stop understanding what the point of the police is. Should we go out to the floor? Tom, would you mind giving Rob your mic, and then you and Jenny can share? And stick your hand up if you want to ask direct questions of Harry or anybody else in the panel at this stage on these particular things that we've been talking about so far, or if you've got any points to make from the specific experience over here.
Why are compliance and conformity cool now?
I don't think they are cool. I think people do it because they're scared, in all honesty. I think back to the disciple Peter, a faithful disciple of Jesus. But when the pressure was on, then as the cock crowed 3 times, Peter denied knowing Jesus. I think people do this to protect themselves, and they do it not because they think it's cool, but because they want, in the words of Douglas Murray, the mob to pass over them and go and find somebody else. I think it's just fear, and I think the snitch culture is again a part of that. It's putting the attention of the authorities onto somebody else, so that, God help me, it passes over me and my family. That's what I think, anyway.
Do you think,
May I clarify something?
Yeah, have you got the microphone still? If you have it back.
Yeah, sorry. It's just, I just meant that normally those sources of sort of criticism and rebellion, like comedy, music, film, they appear to have, they promote this as apparently cool. They used to be the source of criticism, rebellion, nemesis, and now they've been captured. That's what I mean by cool. You see all this evidence, you see on the news, it's kind of, that's what I'm driving at really with my comment.
So you think that the kind of dominant culture that is being policed is exactly the same as shared amongst those who should be kicking against authority?
That's where we used to get. Sorry. Yeah, I suppose it's just, I know, especially as when I grew up, especially comedy, that used to be where I would find some of the most interesting, challenging ideas, and those sources now have been, it appears to me, completely ideologically captured and gate-kept. And I'm just wondering, my question was, why did that become cool? I look at that and I go, conformity, supporting the government, supporting corporations. That used to be really uncool, but...
Again, I think they're afraid of being cancelled. You know, you look at what happened to Graham Linehan, the great writer of Father Ted. He's had several years of absolute hell. He's doing okay now. He's gone off to the States and set up a production company over there. But it costs. It would have been so much easier for him to just toe the line, and then he would have continued to be, cool, woke Graham.
But it's bigger than that, though, isn't it? Because I wouldn't have known, before your case came into the news, I wouldn't know that I should be fearful of the police knocking on my door for a joke. Because at the end of the day, it was a limerick that was a joke. So a lot of the time, these are jokes. And what was the airport case? The chap if you...
The infamous Robin Hood airport case, what was it, back in the early 2010s, I suppose?
Yeah.
Makes this obvious joke about if Robin Hood airport is closed again next weekend, I'm going to blow it sky high. And is actually dragged through the courts for this. I mean, there was a whole string of cases around that time as well, which is probably worth...
Count Dankula as well.
Yeah, that was a little
bit... Nazi pug.
Later. But I think the kind of combination of our growing culture of offence-taking, of speech policing, and the advent of social media has led to a lot of casualties as a consequence of that. There was a period in the early 2010s where every couple of months there'd be some drunk teenager who got online after having one too many, started reposting offensive jokes they found on the internet, and then were actually put in prison for a number of weeks as a consequence of that. So the combination of all these factors has been really quite deadly. And also the way in which, on the question of snitching and all the rest of it, it's clearly responding to some broader problem in society, a kind of fraying of community, a sense of distrust, rather than settling what are often, if you look at those non-crime hate incidents, incredibly petty disagreements and disputes. Someone got a rough haircut and he reported it because he thought this guy disliked him because he spoke Russian. There was the literally playground spats, young girls calling each other smelly on the playground has ended up on non-crime hate incident blacklists. And I think that is part and parcel of a general shift in society where people feel like they can't settle their differences in the way that we usually would by having a word or telling someone to shut up or telling someone not to shut up, to shut their mouth and so on. It's always recourse to the state. Now, that's not everyone, of course, but it's a much more pronounced tendency than I think we saw before. And also the police encourage this kind of behaviour. I mean, this is another one of the things that shows that this zealotry is coming from within the house, as it were, where the police are concerned. The number of times where they would launch a particular police, a particular constabulary would launch one of these campaigns where it was in Merseyside, I think. They showed up outside an Asda with a big van with a big sign on the back of it saying, "Being offensive is an offence," which is not quite right, but it's basically there in terms of the legislation we have. Or there was one in South Yorkshire, I believe, a few years ago, had a hate hurts campaign where they put out all these advertisements and put out all these messages suggesting that people should report if they're upset by something that someone had said to them. So it's that kind of, it's that sort of twin shift, I guess. This is obviously responding to something in society, but also because the police are very keen to encourage it, it's a bit of a perfect storm, I suppose.
But just to actually, the point you raise about sort of what happened to rebellion being cool and youth culture, I think it's a really interesting question. I think it's a key question to this because I think there could be a lot of ways of breaking it down, but I think that there's been an industrial scale collapse of morale in the sort of professional managerial class / humanities sector. from say the 80s to today. I think part of it is the bands that started out as sort of punk and edgy and rebellious got successful and got rich and got co-opted. But then another part of that is that they were always on the left. They were always on the side of what we all commonly understood as the left, against the police, against the Tories, against Reagan, or whatever it was. But the longer decades went by, and the left never actually managed to fix anything or make anything better, and they just became more and more corporate. So a lot of the kind of the cultural zeitgeist just went with it. And COVID was the apex example of that, obviously, when you had Rage Against the Machine or Foo Fighters or whatever being like, vax pass, please, and defending Big Pharma. I mean, it was wild, right? But that is from that the high level to the school gates, literally, everyone who thought of themselves as progressive, right on, liberal, has had this complete morale collapse. And now they're upset and they're pissed off and they're resentful. And I don't think they're just afraid. I think they're actively bad agents in a lot of cases. And they want to take you down and they want to destroy your life because they perceive that you have something that they don't have, or you might maybe you got a good job and they don't have that they want that kind of job. I mean, there's just this proliferation of like emotional, spiritual misery in this very wide demographic of people. And I think that's part of what it is.
But if that's kind of loosely the people who've driven woke, why did they never perceive that they'd won? Because they always think there's another. That's right. There's more of a struggle. The real enemy is
zealotry. Because it's zealotry. It's not based in reason. It's not based in reality. It's based in emotional fervor and like a phantasmagorical enemy. And it's not a political stance. It's an ideology and almost like a mania.
Yeah. Puritanism.
Yes.
You can always make it purer.
Who's speaking? Oh, you've still got the mic. Well done. Kudos to you. Right, there's a chap there with the spectacles.
Sorry, firstly, it was just a quick thank you. Free Speech Union helped me with my Twitter account was banned 2 years ago for some unknown reason. So my membership fee paid off pretty quickly. But on the whole tracking thing and the pre-thought hate crime thing, I think we're not very far away from Philip K. Dick's Minority Report, and I think it behoves us all to kick back against the whole digital identity, digital tracking, digital currency side of things, because I think we're very, very close to that point. We will be arrested prior to committing the murder, even though you haven't even thought about it.
I mean, do people think that there is space for us to be independent and not surveyed when we're also already driven to be on social media? I mean, what made you go on Twitter?
My wife. that was it. I would have happily been an utter nobody, tweeting, crap to absolutely nobody.
Yes, but what made you go on Twitter
What made me go on Twitter? I don't know. I think it was just sort of vague curiosity as to what it was. I mean, it took me ages to work out how it worked. I'm a complete utter technophobe.
You didn't have to print them out and post them.
No, I had no idea. I mean, I suppose the hope that I have is that we are still very, very young in this particular revolution. The digital social media revolution. It's from a historical perspective, it's been like that. And I kind of wonder whether they had similar sort of concerns and worries at the advent of the printing press, for instance, that things which had previously been said in smoky rooms over a candle, they were now written down in on quill and ink and then printed, and oh my God, it's there forever. And I kind of wonder whether or not we just happen to be in the very early stages of this new dawn, and it will work itself out eventually.
What's your view on the tech question?
No, I think that's a really good point, and that comparison to the printing press is instructive, because the panic about social media at the moment is remarkable. I mean, if you ask your average Labour politician, certainly, another crackdown on social media is their answer to absolutely everything. You know, it's a bit like some Conservatives, their answer to absolutely everything is national service. For Labour now, it's a crackdown on social media. But I think it's telling insofar as this Labour government, governments of all stripes, people in power generally have historically been terrified of freedom of speech. You know, it's why they seek to crack down on it. It's why, as Frederick Douglass said, free speech is the dread of tyrants, because there's nothing that someone in power hates more than ordinary people being able to speak, and particularly the way in which social media has provided everyone potentially with a huge platform if they're able to actually build it up. So much of this is explained, I think, by the fact that there was this genuine sort of technological revolution, which we should remember has had a lot of very positive effects. If you think about so many of the big scandals, so many of the big debates that we've been having in recent years, if you take the gender issue, for example, if it wasn't for social media, if it wasn't for alternative media, if it wasn't for the ability of people who have been entirely crowded out from mainstream institutions and elite spaces, these things just wouldn't have been talked about. We wouldn't have found out about so many of the people who ended up being cancelled or booted out of their job or what have you. So there is tremendous positives within it. And I think that's one of the things that has motivated this hysterical crackdown, whether it's on the part of the police, whether it's on the part of the legislators. It's because today, as ever, there's nothing that terrifies people more in power than people being able to speak their minds on the internet. They can only ever see it as a negative thing. I think that's really fascinating. They can only ever see it as something which will be the slippery slope to genocide, as you suggest. Because as we all know, Hitler started off life as a frustrated limerick writer. So, you know, that seems to be the one. Yeah.
Say, I don't know. Let's move on to the next thing that I thought we should talk about, which is this idea of two-tier policing, and more broadly a kind of two-tier society, whereby, well, I'm not going to say what I think it means, because I'm interested in the resonance that it has, why it's. Does anybody know where it came from as a term? Do you know where it came from, Tom? I meant to Google it.
I don't off the top of my head, no.
No, so maybe...
Should have.
It must have been Toby. It'll have been Toby, surely.
Well, I don't know. Do you know?
Yes.
Oh, right, microphone here, please. Sorry, Rob. Other people can Google as he speaks, so they can fact check.
I'm very sorry to claim ownership on this one, but two-tier policing was used in Northern Ireland for the last 30, 40 years.
Okay, and what did it mean?
How inspired I was when people started using it across the water.
And what did it mean?
It was perceived that the Royal Constabulary had a two-tier focus on policing within Northern Ireland between the Protestant and the nationalist or Roman Catholic or Protestant communities. And two-tier policing was the war cry of people who were dissatisfied with policing as it was then.
Interesting, right.
Well, we did invent identity politics, so
yeah. That's the case. That sounds convincing. So, I mean, Tom, what do you think? Do you use the term? Do you think it's a helpful one? I mean, is it a bit like woke, where everybody kind of says, I don't really like the term, but then nevertheless uses it because it does actually resonate, it captures something?
Oh, no, absolutely. The reason it's caught on is because it captures something, it describes something. It seems to me that if you were to boil it down, it's the extent to which the justice system has been corrupted by kind of multiculturalism on one hand and political correctness on the other, the kind of twin evils, if you like, the way in which equality before the law has been slowly corroded because the police, the prosecutors, the judiciary have come to believe that there are some higher goals which need to be attended to. For instance, we need to attend to past historical injustice. We need to attend to disparities that might exist within, say, convictions. And so, therefore, different standards have to apply in different circumstances. There's also the way in which the police, and this is something that they really have come to see as their key role in so many respects, the management of race relations, which I find a really kind of poisonous idea, to constantly think of the society as just a kind of assemblage of demographics you constantly have to kind of manage as if they are kind of volatile children. That's really a key part of this phenomenon as we've seen it. And there are very clear-cut examples. Do you see it kind of informally in terms of what appears to be an identical crime being treated very, very differently? So, for instance, there was the case of the paraglider girls. I'm not sure if anyone has read this story. It was came out of the pro-Hamas, frankly, marches that we've been having in London every couple of weeks. There were two, this was very early on, there were two young women who were walking around with stickers on their backs of paragliders. And ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't heard the story, they're not paraglider enthusiasts. That was a reference to Hamas, to the pogromists of Hamas who flew into southern Israel on paragliders before they murdered and raped their way through a music festival. They get arrested, they are tried, they are convicted for inciting racial hatred effectively, but they're given a 12-month conditional charge. It's essentially a kind of slap on the wrist, really. And I should say, as a kind of free speech fundamentalist, I don't think that even that should end up in the courts, but nevertheless, that thing happened. There's another case of a far-right activist, a guy called Sam Mellier, anti-Semitic lunatic. He gets prosecuted for also producing anti-Semitic stickers, not of paragliders, of a more kind of general far-right vintage, shall we say, but nevertheless, essentially a similar crime. He ends up with 2 years in prison. People see this, and not because they've got any sympathy with the far-right character, but they think there's clearly a political calculation that's going on here. And you see it in some of the sentencing remarks, certainly around the Southport arrests, the speech-related Southport arrests, where judges took it upon themselves to make kind of moral statements, not just about the person who was being sent down, but also about the importance of diversity and so on. You think these considerations are creeping in to an extent which is really quite concerning. And then, of course, there's the formal examples of it, the guidance. So there was this big row in England recently about the Sentencing Council guidelines, which essentially said that for people who are members of an ethnic or faith minority, they should, in almost all cases, get one of these things called a pre-sentencing report, which doesn't guarantee you won't go to prison, but makes it a little less likely that you'll go to prison. There was a huge storm about this. They've kiboshed it for the moment. But as the Daily Telegraph pointed out, there's very similar guidelines already in place for things like bail, when people should and shouldn't be bailed. And the justification for this is very explicit. They say we've got disparities in outcomes in the justice system. So rather than try to work out how we address that at source, for instance, why try to work out why, on average, black Brits tend to plead not guilty more often? They don't tend to trust their duty solicitor, which often leads to them getting harsher sentences. Rather than try to address those issues, they think what we'll do is we'll fiddle the statistics at the other end and introduce two-tier justice effectively. So it's so clear. And yes, as with any term that kind of takes off, it's going to be used a little liberally sometimes not with a lot of concision. But I think people know it when they see it, and I think they get increasingly frustrated with the idea that it's just a myth or it's been whipped up by right-wing commentators to have something to talk about. There are so many examples now that it really needs to be addressed for trust in the system as much as anything else.
And do you think it's reducible? So a lot of people, certainly if you tried to sort of do a survey of Twitter as to what people mean by it, they tend to focus on differential policing of Islam compared to other faiths or other minorities. Or there is a lot of racist kind of content at the moment I'm seeing, certainly on social media. And so to me, that's just an evidence that all of these approaches do not work. They have the exact opposite approach. In the same way that people that are gender non-conforming, I'm sure, are having a tougher time than they ever have. Because whether that's a bloke wearing a bit of makeup, because people now, think he's a kind of die-hard trans activist, whereas actually he's a bloke who likes wearing a bit of lipstick. Why that all of these measures have actually made it worse. So do you think at a certain point they'll realise that has the exact opposite effect of sort of soothing social tensions?
Well, they haven't noticed it so far. It's been quite a long time they've been going down this particular road. I mean, they make, as you suggest, Jan, like a fundamental mistake. This goes for equality before the law. This also goes for freedom of speech. The establishment, and by which I include the kind of criminal justice system, have got it into their heads that freedom of speech and equality before the law are obstacles to a harmonious, diverse society, when it's the complete opposite. If you've got a society in which there are many people of many backgrounds, many faiths, you need to be able to have a robust culture in which differences can be hashed out, ideas can be debated. If there are problems which arise, they should be dealt with in a forthright way. Otherwise, they will, if they're not talked about, they get hijacked by bad actors in precisely the way that you do see play out on social media a lot of the time. I mean, talking about kind of criminal justice, not to move it away too much from free speech, but just for a moment, the grooming gangs phenomenon, the rape gangs phenomenon is a perfect example of this. Almost unthinkingly, police forces across England decided that it was more important to protect the PR image of multiculturalism than to protect working class girls from rape, which is a horrendous calculation to make in any situation. And they did it explicitly, and you see it in report after report, whether it's Rotherham or Telford or whatever, that they were primarily concerned about race relations. if you're concerned about race relations, maybe you shouldn't have ignored this for so long that it could genuinely be hijacked by far-right agitators who only want to use it to pretend that all Pakistani Muslims are like that, or to try and make this something which is about race rather than is about a particular issue that wasn't properly addressed for faux anti-racist reasons, effectively. So it's spectacularly backfired, but I think the problem is we are dealing with ideology. It's often not because these people have, been trained in the rantings of critical race theorists, but it's just in the ether in all of these organisations. They've picked it up, and therefore it makes it even more difficult to shake, because amongst those people, that is common sense, unfortunately. That's the kind of received wisdom amongst a lot of people in the police and politics and so on at this point.
If I can just jump in there, Jan. Fair Cop actually asked the College of Police that exact question. We said, has there been any consideration at all that the interventionary approach of non-crime hate incidents has had the opposite effect to that which you desired? And the answer came back, none whatsoever. Absolutely none. They'd done no academic research to support non-crime hate incidents. They'd done no empirical research to see whether non-crime hate incidents worked. I was at the House of Lords a few weeks ago, and I was invited to ask questions of the chair of the College of Policing and his sidekick, a superintendent who's in charge of strategy for policing right the way through the country. And in the preamble to my question, I said, look, we know that there is no analysis of non-crime hate incidents. And the superintendent stopped me there and said, Harry, I will not have you lying in the House of Lords. I will not have you telling us that there is no analysis. There is plenty of analysis of non-crime hate incidents. There is lots of it. And I thought, well, there wasn't in 2020 because Fair Cop did freedom of information requests and there was no analysis, but maybe things have changed. So I left that meeting with a flea in my ear and immediately put out further freedom of information requests, asking police forces, what analysis do you do of non-crime hate incidents in relation to crime? Every force so far that's returned has said they don't do any. They do none whatsoever. Non-crime hate incidents and this sort of police intervention, they have become an end in themselves. They are nothing to do with preventing crime. Their sole purpose, regardless of intent, their sole purpose practically is to generate a chilling effect on free speech. And by that measure, the College of Police and Chief Constables and the Home Secretary know that they work very, very well. So that's why there is no motivation to put them to the test.
Do you think, to sort of stick to the two-tier point, is it something that, apart from the previous history, the prehistory of it, do you think over here is it applied as well? Is it something that's being talked about?
Well, actually, I'd like to ask the audience that. My understanding is that in terms of newer populations and the immigration issue, where a lot of other aspects were about 10 or 20 years behind the rest of the UK. But it's actually really interesting that you pointed out that the two-tier phrase comes from here, because I think the troubles, people outside Northern Ireland certainly don't often notice how much the troubles and the kind of the various ways of dealing with that set the predicate for woke takeover of institutions, which sounds counterintuitive in a way, but that was the result of identity politics. Northern Ireland invented identity politics, and what was it? 3,000 people died as a result. The policing criticisms, if I remember rightly, and I'm sure people here would know better or remember better, were valid, and there were issues surrounding, communal tensions, and the police being politically biased to one side. Okay, hold on, you can have your hands up. Okay, yeah. Hold on, we'll come out. Stick your hand up and we'll come out. Because nobody can hear you. Yeah, fair enough. As terms of these newer problems, I haven't run into this, but maybe someone in the audience can say that's also wrong.
Right, stick your hand up and we'll take you in order. Right, if Rob's going to take your... So the chap with the... As you're wearing a tie, you get to speak.
Hello. Yeah, so I want to commend the army for their considerable restraint shown through 30 years of heartless, brutal terrorism in Northern Ireland. I would also, since I have the opportunity, like to commend the IDF for their phenomenal restraint at their own top. Whilst the English chaps on the panel fiddle whilst Rome burns. England is not in good shape. Certainly not London, which is where I live. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll let the English chaps defend themselves in a minute. Okay, right, there's a lady right at the back. Hello.
Hi, so I just want to make a point that I think it might be...
Is it going to be about this bit about two-tier policing? And
yeah,
okay.
I think it's naive to think that it's that they just haven't done the studies. Apart from the fact they suppress them, it's not that they are getting the opposite effect of their outcome. This is the outcome they want. They want civil unrest, and then to cul-de-sac people into being easy targets. Then they can lock up or control it some way, like us with the free speech. So I've got two questions for Harry. Harry, I'm wondering what percentage of police you might think are still representing the people, or would be willing to protect us after COVID, especially. There's a big everybody got filtered through, and then a real question that I worry about a lot because I've had personal experience is what are the chances that the people like us in this room right now will end up stuck in prison? They'll find ways to keep us there. It's going down a road where I feel like in 2 years' time they'll start arresting us all and they'll find reasons to keep us in. So I'm just wondering what you think the chances are of that.
So you're saying that there is a kind of concerted attack on the majority population? Is that what you're saying?
I think they're not unaware. They're deliberately suppressing the studies, but they've already done the sociological and psychological studies. They know all this in advance for decades, and Northern Ireland could be the perfect petri dish for that. And then they know what the results will be. It's like the Barbra Streisand effect. They know that will be the effect. That the more they try and clamp down or make us feel like we're afraid to stand up to Islam, the more the boiling pot will go over. And that's what they actually want as an excuse to create martial law and things like that, or to target us, to make us easy to spot.
Okay, well, let's come back to the panel and see whether you think there's some merit in that or whether you think that's going way too far. Harry, what do you think?
Well, for starters, I still believe that the vast majority of police officers are in the job for the right reason. That I think is the good news. And I think most police officers are far too busy dealing with domestics, the consequences of drug addictions, domestic violence, to be involved in a lot of what we're talking about today. The downside is that there is a critical number of police officers who are engaged in this form of social engineering. So whilst the majority are not, enough are to make your concerns my concerns, and I think we should be worried. And it's not just you and I as members of the public who are worried. I'm part of a very, very large organisation called Trojan Wellbeing, which looks after police officers who are being put through the mill by professional standards. And I can tell you now that there is a vindictive de-recruitment of police officers that the powers that be are actively trying to get rid of good old school, common sense police officers to make room for a new, woke, ideological breed. And that really worries me.
Okay. Tom, I mean, where do you... sorry, Jenny. I mean, so the easy response is to say, oh, well, that's kind of conspiratorial. That sounds that sounds like a conspiracy, you know, and that would be the kind of standard response that I think you'd probably hear quite a lot. So how would you respond to those kind of views that somehow what's cooking here is a social conflict that, well, certainly in the mainland we haven't seen. Maybe over here, well, obviously over here very different. But what's your view?
Well, I think when it comes to the question of what's driving this speech policing, what's driving this locking up of people at genuinely kind of historically unprecedented levels, like we shouldn't beat around the bush just because it's relatively short sentences, just because it's silly things on social media, just because they're often quite farcical, the way in which these things pans out. The extent to which this has become almost mundane is the thing that alarms me the most. The way in which the police have just become almost like the rent-a-goons of the easily offended, whether it's a school or whether it's a trans activist or whatever. You know, you can basically kind of swat someone that you dislike just by suggesting that they've committed one of these heresies. The thing that I find, again, most chilling about it is that it's become really mundane, and also that it was kind of accidental. Like, it's not as if, as some of our more colourful cousins over in America seem to think, that Keir Starmer has kind of come into power and has ushered in some kind of personalist dictatorship. That even would be a bit more coherent. You at least would know the thing that you were rebelling against. It's been this much more broad sweeping, unthinking, ideological, but kind of soft ideological turn towards assuming that it's of crucial importance that dissent is policed, that hate is policed, that emotion is policed. This is something which has kind of bubbled up from within the establishment, but it's not for a kind of concerted, we need to lock all the people up kind of thing, I suppose is what I'm getting.
So when you look at, say, the Lucy Connolly case, so everybody here has heard of Lucy Connolly, the woman who is currently in prison because of one tweet that was up for 4.5 hours. I mean, it was seen by 310,000 people, but that wasn't her intention. That's just because it it took off and went crazy. So her appeal is coming up on the 15th of May against her sentence. I mean, it's so extraordinary, that story, isn't it? And I think a lot of people would not believe it if it hadn't been really brought to the fore by, well, most recently by Alison Pearson's piece last weekend. And when I think I know the story, and then I read what Alison's written, and I cannot believe it. And the cruelty of it, the disproportionality of it, and the fact that what I immediately think is, how many more people are there like Lucy Connolly? I mean, there must be other people, mustn't there? The same way I think there must be loads more Harry Millers who nobody's heard of. So that sounds much more systematic.
No, and I think so many more of those cases are going to come out in the wash in the months to come because of the speed with which those prosecutions happened, the understandable pressure that people came under to plead guilty in order to, in the hope, and this comes in the Lucy Connolly case, in the hope that that would lead to more leniency, which certainly wasn't delivered. There's also the case of Jamie Michael. I'm not sure if people have seen this as well. Another person who the Free Speech Union was instrumental in getting off his particular charge. He posted a video in the wake of Southport when those kind of rumours were doing the rounds about it being a Muslim asylum seeker who'd committed those atrocities. And unlike Lucy Connolly, whose tweet was quite clearly hate-filled, and whether or not that was a moment of madness, I don't know the woman, it's hard to tell, but this video in question was him just saying, we need to have a public meeting, we need to protect the schools, there are some radicalised idiots in those migrant hotels. He was upset, but there was nothing in there that was at all kind of clearly hate-filled at all. He was facing potentially a very serious prison sentence for inciting racial hatred. His story is fascinating because of the fact that, again, you've got a duty solicitor basically urging you to plead guilty, a transcript of what his video, they weren't even talking to him on the basis of the video itself, they had a transcript which had errors in it, and it was only because of his own bloody-mindedness that he decided to, first of all kind of withhold a plea, but then ultimately plead not guilty, that the Free Speech Union found out about him and were able to help him. It goes to a jury trial and he's acquitted within minutes because as soon as a jury of his peers see it, they recognise this for what it was. So it was within a very politically charged climate. And I think it really did demonstrate the really, this kind of theory of free speech being at the root of all problems. The idea that the reason those riots happened was because of too much freedom of speech on the internet. That if Elon Musk didn't take over X, it would never have happened. It's this, first, it's risible, like we've never had horrendous violent disorder or kind of racist riots before, that there might be kind of broader social problems that need to be addressed. The problem is social media, therefore we need to deal with the hate speakers as harshly as possible, and then it will never happen again. And you see this mania perfectly summed up in the fact that Lucy Connolly got a longer sentence than one of the rioters in Southport who was attacking a mosque, who was part of that horrendous mob. He got, I think, 24 months. And she got 31. That's absurd. And I think does speak to this free speech at the root of all evil. It's the kind of perspective that a lot of the people within the justice system seem to have at this point.
And another thing that makes me think is I would be very disturbed to live in a society where people didn't get extremely angry when children are murdered. And I find that really quite extraordinary that we're trying to rein that in, rather than that being actually a very positive response, not to go and be violent, but to actually get angry. I mean, for goodness sake, how on earth is anything going to happen if people don't get angry when children are murdered in cold blood? I cannot see how that can become something that society just doesn't want to look at and doesn't actually sort of say, well, that should be our common response, actually. And I'm sure for most of us, that was our response, was just utter hatred for this person, regardless of what we knew or didn't know about them. Whoever might do that, you should be shocked, and you should also be full of hate, I think, probably immediately, in the immediacy. Doesn't mean you then project that out to everybody else that you think might be implicated or not, but because, of course, there was a lot of untruths passed around and all of that. So, yeah, Jenny, I mean, what do you think about these cases?
Well, to sort of address the lady's question, I mean, I know what you mean exactly. I know exactly what you mean, because it is hard not to see this as a designed or, concerted effort to penalize one segment of society and give a free pass to another segment of society. And that doesn't seem controversial or conspiratorial to me to notice that. The only thing, I mean, I have obviously no idea if in 2 years' time would be rounded up, and I have no idea, I really hope not. But I will say that...
Let's start with this room and this video, by the way. We'll burn the registration list.
I will denounce all of you. I can't do time. No, but I will say that the only thing, I hope this isn't copium, as they say online, but I think they are too stupid and disorganized, and they're not, I don't know if they have the clout to fully see through an actual regime takeover, dictatorship to that level. I think when Trump won in November and the Biden administration and the Democratic Party and whatever just sort of fell apart, I thought, oh, actually, and listening to people like Mark Andreessen when he had sat down with the Biden administration, I know we're getting onto that in a minute, but these people are not very bright, is my point. They are very confident, and they really do think they're right, they're correct, but they're not. But the positive side is, I don't think, of course, what do I know? I've never even met them, but I don't think they have what it takes to fully compete.
Oh, nobody can hear you if you just interject.
I don't think they have what it takes to really carry out the putsch fully.
Okay. I think
I suppose me and Harry should respond to that criticism as well about why we haven't joined the army yet. I should say, if I was to even try and join the British Army or the IDF, neither of them would have me, and for good reason.
You're too tall.
It'd be a threat to myself and my comrades. Liability, certainly. But.
Well, that's a cop-out. Let's go on to America then, actually, given that Jenny's got history there, she's got form, but also, obviously lately free speech has become an issue because President Trump and J.D. Vance and Musk have been making a huge issue of it and pointing the finger at the UK. How helpful do you think that is? Do you think there's anything concerning in it? Are they pointing the finger at us while being authoritarian back in the States? Is there some truth in those accusations that people are saying? How should we respond? I know that in Spiked you were quite critical of Trump's finger pointing at the UK. What brought you to that conclusion?
Just that this crisis of freedom of speech in the United Kingdom is the United Kingdom's business. It's something that we can only solve ourselves, first of all. Fundamentally, if we want to roll back all of these laws, we shouldn't, as I saw some voices on the right engaging in, hope that Daddy is going to come and save us, essentially, is what they were getting at. I think that's infantilizing. I also think it's doomed to fail. If anything, I think, as we saw when Trump was first in office, the extent to which not just the kind of liberal, left, progressive, whatever they're calling themselves now, establishment doubled down whenever he said anything. That also happened in the UK, you know. So I think we're on to a loser if we're expecting JD Vance or Donald Trump to come and save us. And also, it's just none of their business. You know, in the same way that we had a few hundred years ago, we had a spat over whether or not London should control America. I don't think Washington should control what's going on in London either. So this is just a fundamental point about free speech as well as, and how you win it, but also sovereignty. Really,
but I understand that point. So, but I think a lot of people in the kind of the free speech camp in the UK are immensely grateful to Musk in particular to start with. I know he was voted kind of Hero of the Year in our Christmas vote, probably 2 years running actually. I mean, I'm the same in that I'm uncomfortable with the daddy, let's look to daddy kind of syndrome. But what's your view?
Oh, I absolutely hate it. I don't want Donald Trump or Vance getting involved in British politics. I think Britons have been able to rescue themselves throughout history. We did it in 1215 when the barons got a bit fed up with the king expressing too much authority. We got a bit uppity ourselves and sorted that out, and the result was the Magna Carta. We did it again in the 1500s when the king was getting a little bit too authoritarian. We went into battle and sorted it out ourselves. You mentioned 1776. Again, that was a bunch of Englishmen who decided that the authorities were getting too authoritarian, and they sorted it out themselves. 1990, we sorted it out with the poll tax. I don't think we should be looking over the water for help. I think it is down to Britain to save itself, and I really do not appreciate Donald Trump sticking his nose into our business.
Jenny?
I love it.
This is why we put this panel together.
Yeah, no, I mean...
Trump fangirl.
A bit, weirdly. I didn't start out that way. But, I mean, I take your points, I guess. I find it slightly amusing that you're taking it quite that seriously, in a way. But, I mean, look, I think the comfort that it gives to the allies, I think, is what, you know, the free speech activists here far outweighs, it outweighs the sense of their impinging on UK sovereignty. I don't think I think running off at the mouth on X isn't the same as marshalling the Navy to come over and land on the British shores. Although, you know, I'm open to it. I'm obviously kidding.
Hurty words.
I'm kidding. But no, I think one of the reasons I do enjoy it is because, and this is purely personal, I'm not trying to make this into some sort of intellectual stance, but a personality thing for me is that I've over the years, I've been so exhausted and bored and disappointed by the kind of politician speak and that sort of veneer of respectability and that ability to say absolutely nothing with words. That I am just like giving water to a man in a desert. I'm loving all of the bombastic, intemperate, undiplomatic, impolitic stream of consciousness that comes from Musk and Trump and Vance. I love it. I absolutely love it. I think it's hilarious. I think it serves a purpose. And I love it. Bring it on.
Okay, some people clapped the other way, so how come that happened? Right, let's come out to you again then. Where's the mic? Hands up for this section then, if you would like to. You want to? Okay, our resident Texan. Come on, Rob.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not going to hijack this, but I'm going to throw my 2 cents in. I voted for Donald Trump 3 times, and I would gladly vote for him 5,000 more times. Number 2, this woke bullshit came from America to this great country, right? And some beautiful things come from America to this country, and some terrible things. And this is one of the terrible things that came from America to this great country. And it's going to take, in my opinion, it's going to take that country to suck it back out. And I thank God for Donald Trump. This country needs a version of Donald Trump who's actually going to do something. Because I worry because I can go back to America. What are y'all going to do when this country is destroyed? And so I remember when Barack Obama stuck his nose into Brexit and said that the UK was going to go to the back of the line if they supported it, and I hated that. So I appreciate the fact that y'all don't want Americans butting into this. What we're going through now, in my opinion, is something very different. This is the West being destroyed from within. And it takes a destroyer like Donald Trump, like you said, who's somebody who's rude and crude and all of those things, but is actually doing it. If this country doesn't get its act together, and I don't know Northern Ireland as well as I do England and stuff, but I'm telling you that the West is going to lose, and Donald Trump is the one thing right now, in my opinion, that's saving the United States. And this country needs that, and God bless him for what he's doing. And I hope this happens here too. So.
Okay, are you going to disagree with him? Yes, good, okay. Wait for the mic.
Okay, so I think there's something about things being hyperbolic and then the reality. So I'm a therapist, a thoughtful therapist, and some of my colleagues here. And we've had the CAS report, which is great, but we are a long way from stopping this gender-affirming care creeping in with the NHS guidelines. If you look at the person spec, if not the person spec, the guidelines, and it's still there, it's going to take a lot more work. So, it's a bit like puberty blocker trials are going to happen. So we kind of think, great, something wonderful has happened from up there, but actually we've still got a hell of a lot of work to do, challenging how these institutions, our own professional memberships in the therapy world, are trying to silence our free speech. So that's in something that's supposed to be about, thoughtful therapists. It's about thinking and about challenging this, and it's great. It's great Donald Trump's doing this stuff about sport and all the rest of it, but it still is the nitty-gritty, the day-to-day, when you're dealing with it, when you're dealing with the young people and the hell of it and the cruelty of it and the horror of it, actually.
Yes, that's interesting, because my sort of discomfort with the Trump phenomenon is I fear that there's a kind of irresponsibility where it's almost like we're watching a wrestling match. And actually, there is immense amounts of hard, serious work that goes into overturning bad ideas. And I kind of worry that that we can look from afar and, Trump comes and rescues us.
Yes. And we're even doing it with the CAS report. We're even doing it's great, it's happened, it's all going to be fine.
Well, that was
really,
it's
not going to be fine.
And that was also cited in America. So, the kind of impact of Turf Island going back to America was very important. Right, okay. Hang on, no. Absolutely not. No. Right. It's not that I'm not going to necessarily take you, it's just that you're not going to do without a microphone. Not that you need one. Right. Right. First of all, the lady down here, Rob. She looks like a quiet person.
Okay, good evening to you all, and welcome to Belfast. I have a sort of a, rather than a question, a bit of a statement to make, and I kind of would like to put it to you in the nicest possible way, Harry. I find that, for example, in everyday life, if you're on Facebook or you're on Twitter or whatever you're on a few social media forums. And if I even slightly say I agree with anything that Donald Trump does, for example, as the gentleman who is holding the microphone, I agree with a lot of what he says. I don't agree with everything he says, but I agree with a lot of what he says. And same with this lady here. I agree with a lot you're saying about Donald Trump. I don't agree with everything he says and does, but I do agree with a lot. And if I had the choice, if I was American, to vote for Kamala Harris or Donald Trump, I would have chosen Donald Trump for many reasons. But the thing that I don't understand is basic civilization. A basic civilized communication. You cannot seem to put anything about Donald Trump or agree with anything he says without people absolutely losing their minds. And I mean, I watch it and I listen to it, and I've just for as a bit of a let's see where this goes, I have carried on communicating with these people, and they literally want to wish you death.
Yeah.
If you say, I say, well, actually, I don't agree about that, but I think he's great on this. It doesn't matter. You are die-hard, dyed-in-the-wool supporter of Donald Trump, you must be evil, etc., etc. Now, Harry, whenever you, for example, if you don't mind me saying, when you mentioned Donald Trump, you got very emotional very quickly about him, and very, very emotive. And that was another example.
If I was American, I would have voted Donald Trump. No two ways about it. I was simply saying about what I don't like is his input into what's going and commentary on what's going on here. That's it. Were I American, I would have voted Trump.
Okay, well that's fine then. I must have understood what you said. I thought from a free speech point of view, he's great. So there you go. And they're saying, why can't we all be civilized? There you go.
Okay, chap here. I can see.
Thank you. Also on that note, I'm a clinical psychologist with my colleagues here. So I tend to think around these things in psychological terms, and it is always very interesting to listen to legal arguments and to convert them into psychological phenomena. And what we're essentially dealing with here is the battle between courage and fear, collective courage versus collective fear. And what goes along with collective courage versus collective fear is the question, which is what I'm seeing true, or is it an illusion? And dictatorships are great with playing with illusion. And one way in which they keep illusion alive is to punish those who speak the truth, because truth tends to be disillusioning. So what I appreciate around Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and as you can hear, I'm South African, and recently there has been quite some focus around the farm attacks and the extreme systemic anti-white racist hatred that is being nurtured in politics, in the media. You use the phrase legacy media. I like the phrase regime media or old media. So what powerful people do when they raise these issues, yes, some people might think Big Daddy is coming to rescue us. I agree with you. It won't work. It doesn't work. But when powerful people highlight these truths, powerful people encourage those who've been enfeebled by intimidation and fear to respect the illusion and instead encourage them, embolden them to speak the truth and to disillusion the lie.
Thank you. Interesting. I'll get people to come back, but first of all, can we get the microphone to Jeffrey Dudgeon, MBE? on our Northern Ireland Advisory Council.
Thanks, Jan. I wasn't going to speak today until the Trump issue came up, and I began to think the distinctions within the panel were quite illustrative. I don't understand why Jenny has come to the position she's come to, but I'd love to hear. I'd rather suspect it wasn't what she was brought into in that respect. Maybe it's her American, living in America. But I have to be rather cruel to our two Englishmen on the panel. They are sounding to me like little Englanders.
Quite worse.
They don't. I mean, the one thing I've come to understand about Trump, and it takes a bit of time, is he is an American. He's not British by default or being half Scottish, but it's because he's an American and because the British and the English in particular don't have any sense of history, and they don't understand how people could be antagonistic to England, especially if they speak English. And it's just they have no concept of who Trump is. And Vance is particularly interesting because he's a hillbilly, he's from Ulster, we're told. He's also a Catholic, he's become a Catholic, he's married to a Hindu.
You're talking about Vance now? Sorry, you're talking about J.D. Vance?
I am.
Yeah, sorry, I thought you were Trump.
I mean, he lectured the crew in the Munich conference a few weeks ago. It was priceless to watch them. One of them was crying. And they'd never heard anything like it. I mean, Vance, he's very particular on the abortion zone issue, but I think because he's a Catholic, that has picked up his attention, and we have that issue here in Belfast. In Coleraine, some retired pastor is now on a charge of praying silently. And I just hope Vance takes up that issue because it's a local version of what's been happening elsewhere. Just on abortion, I mean, I was always in favour of abortion law reform. I was unique probably for 30 years thinking this, and now suddenly it's compulsory to believe in abortion at any moment of any woman's life. And I've been overtaken by a herd of progressives.
What an image. Trampled by the blue hairs.
We'll take Vance lecturing us. It was one of the best things I've heard in a long time.
No offence, madam with the blue hair. Sorry. Is that, if you got the mic? Okay. I'm aware of the time, so I think what we're going to do is we're going to come back to the panel to round things off, and then we're going to go off and, you can come and pick on whoever you want to pick on in the bar, and we'll carry on chatting. It's going to be very, very noisy in there, so let's enjoy ourselves over a drink to carry on. So I'd obviously respond to some of those points, but maybe we could also cover the final thing that I thought we might talk about, which is the kind of media. So I'm particularly interested to hear from you, Tom, on where you think Spiked sits and how you kind of position Spiked, and maybe, and then obviously you've gone from the New York Times to Substacking, what you think of that kind of that other space and the opportunities that are there, and then when you get to Harry. Obviously, you've used social media to maximum effect. So even though it was the cause of all your initial pain, it's been the way in which you've created yourself as a public person that we all know about, which is fantastic. So let's start with you, Tom. How do you work through positions with Spiked?
Well, I think we're in a slightly interesting position because we're not legacy media, we're not mainstream media. We are alternative media, but we've been around for 25 years, so we're like legacy alternative media at this point. But I think we're a good example of how the internet and later on kind of social media is just, as much as there are negatives to it that we could all point to and discuss, the positives far outweigh that. I mean, it's been absolutely transformative. The way in which people can, on the basis these days of basically just having an X account or a YouTube account, can put together an enormous audience over quite a short space of time, can reach people, can shine a light on issues that the mainstream media, if it does cover them, it covers them in a kind of perfunctory fashion and then moves on very quickly. It's been fantastic. I mean, I know there's a lot of gender critical campaigns in tonight, and that is a key example of that I always go back to. That would not have been discussed were it not for people shut out from elite spaces finding other venues to talk about those things. It's one of and Spiked was a publication which took an interest in that and wanted to publish people from that world relatively early on, because we saw how important and how right those campaigners were about that particular issue. So there's an awful lot of potential there, and I think it's been overwhelmingly positive. Yes, there's concerns around the edges of, is there a kind of basically taking the fundamental kind of journalistic standards in terms of truth seeking and fact checking and good hard journalism. How does that translate into an alternative media space is not a straightforward one, particularly when it comes to news. You need a lot of money, you need a lot of lawyers, you need a lot of time to do that kind of thing. Whereas if you're just in the realm of opinion and so on, that's something that you can do quite straightforwardly. So there are problems, there are issues, there are things that come up in relation to this issue.
No, enough, in the bar.
Then, but at the same time, that it's infinitely outweighed by how much of a positive impact I think it's had, not just on journalism, but just on political discussion, full stop, in my view.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Jenny?
Right, well...
You can respond to things that have come up in
Yeah, I mean, I think the media... I literally blame the media. Like, that is what I blame. I blame the media 100% for creating a miasma in which a large proportion of our compatriots and neighbors, friends, family members live. There's one exception, and he's here, and that's the Belfast newsletter. Yeah, I mean, I'm old enough to remember a time before the internet in media, and it was a lot saner. And I always tell the story about the New York Times. I was like 23 or something, and the editor that I worked for, I was his clerk. It was like an admin news role, and it was an election day, a local election, and I had gone to vote that morning, and I asked him had he gone to vote, and he looked at me like I was an idiot, and he said, "I don't vote." And I was like, "Ooh, why?" And he's like, "Because I am an editor at the New York Times." He's like, that would undermine my impartiality. I will never vote. Now, that was in 1999 or 2000. And I mean, that has absolutely flipped and reversed itself. It is 100% captured. There has been a velvet revolution in newsrooms. All newsrooms, maybe except the newsletter, literally. I mean, I can't think of another one. And it's a huge problem. I mean, I'm not really a kind of a hanging judge or a prosecutorial type, but I sometimes think there is a case to be made for some sort of Truth and Reconciliation Commission for media. Now, Substack is a great alternative. I agree with you, by the way, that social media is a huge force for good, and there's a lot of actual wholesome stuff on there too. Depends on your algorithm. But Substack is a incredible engine that powers really good content. I know a lot of people hate that word, but I quite like it. It's a very easy to use publishing platform. I'm a huge booster of it. It also has its own social media network, which to me can in some ways replace X. And you engage with people, and people argue with you. And I've had actual like blue-haired progressives, again, sorry about the blue hair comment, attack me. And so it's not entirely bubble-based. But it is very engagement heavy. So, I mean, in terms of the discourse, I find a lot of reason to be optimistic, in spite of everything.
Wow. Great ending. Harry?
Yeah, I don't particularly like social media, if I'm honest. I try and avoid Twitter or X when I possibly can. But it is very, very useful. If we pull some sort of stunt, like on April the 1st this year, I locked myself into the police headquarters of Northumbria dressed as a jester. I can get that directly to the chief constable, because they may pretend that they don't like us, and they don't like us, but they do follow us. and we're able to get our message out to people with power through social media. The month before, we were up there, and I handcuffed myself to the flagpole. And again, we were able to get the message directly to the Chief Constable. So I don't enjoy it at all. I still do quite enjoy legacy media. I still love reading the Daily Mail. I love reading the Times. I love reading and being in the Telegraph, which I'm in a hell of a lot these days. But for me, social media, it will remain a necessary tool for me to speak to power. But that's about it as far as I'm concerned.
Interesting. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, well, that's us wound up for the evening. From this
more
end.
ways than one.
Yeah, that's right.
It was a tough crowd for the English.
I know, that's right. We've got a back entrance for Harry and Tom to sneak out of. Or maybe I'm sure they won't do that. They'll be in the middle of everything for the next hour. So thank you very much for coming. If you're not a member of the Free Speech Union already, do come and talk to me. Come and pick up a leaflet. It's really, really easy to go to our website. You can talk to many people in the room who we've helped. I can see Sarah nodding and various other people that we've helped. They will tell you how great we are. But yes, there are a lot of fans in the room. So do ask people, actually, if they're members and why. And if you're not a member, then you should be persuaded to be one by the end of the night. So thank you very much to the venue, the Ulster Museum, which is a fantastic place. I think you'll agree. Thank you to all of our local people on the ground who've helped us out, scouting venues and with everything else, briefing me on what we should cover in this session. And then also to Rob, who's come over from Manchester especially, in order to help us out. He comes to lots of our regional events and brings us the Texan flavour. Are you actually from Texas? Yeah, okay, I'm not making that up. And I'm watching Yellowstone at the moment. I'm completely hooked on it. Yay! I'm missing my Cowboys. I need to, which I thoroughly recommend. And it's on Netflix, which you will not believe when you watch it. Actually, Netflix will put out something that's as manly as Yellowstone. Great. Okay. Thanks very much, everybody, for coming, and we'll see you in the bar. We've got another hour to go. Thank you.